And welcome. So I'd just like to, firstly, before we begin, take any apologies, and we have an apology from Sally. There being any apologies? Can I move it? Murray, second. John. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Before we carry on with the public forum, I do want to ask that we take a minute silence for the death of Matthew Hunt, the police officer in Auckland, because it is a shock to all our communities when something like that happens, and it's extraordinary for our country really to have something like that happen. And these are people that help to keep us safe, and I think it's important that we acknowledge them and give them our full support. So can I just have a moment's silence in acknowledgement of Matthew Hunt. Thank you, everyone. Right, now we're straight into the public forum. So I'd just like to invite the first speaker, which is Ben Dunbar-Smith, please.
Good morning. I'm here to follow up on my submission to the annual plan rates increase. Just asking these questions: why did it occur, who's responsible, and how to prevent another occurrence? So, congratulations. We were looking at 23%, then 10%, now 4.98. You've done a good job to actually prevent that. But it's still difficult for the ratepayers. There's 27,000 of us that are on this ship. $170 plus the increase in charges is still challenging for many. You've got pensioners, a significant number of pensioners here. You also have young families facing job losses. And the tourism cafe business is going to face particularly hard times. We still have one of the highest rate increases in New Zealand, despite the cuts you've made. And many projects are delayed because of the blowout in the OPEX. What went wrong? How to stop it? This is oil trailing from a ship. It's what you should see when OPEX is losing throughout a year. The fuel you burn is what's driving the ship. CapEx is funded by borrowing, but OPEX is what you use for your daily groceries. Blowouts like this are what push up the rates. The captain should know on a monthly basis when the OPEX is getting out of control. Pre-election report didn't give any clue to this. There was no mention of the $6 million blowout. The question was, did the CEO not know in July when this was happening? Maybe he didn't know, why not? The budget blowout was fully revealed on the 19th September in the washout, when suddenly there was 6.07 arriving at these functions. But it appears the CEO did know on the 29th of May when the councillors were briefed on that in the workshop. This is according to information from staff. And the CEO's report dated the 10th of June, which went to the 9th of July Council, also referred to this. But the pre-election report was uploaded on the 4th of July after the CEO's report was written on the 10th of June. So the question is, voting papers also went out on the 20th of September after the 19th of September blowout was announced publicly, but there was no addendum. So why wasn't it forewarned in the pre-election report? If voters had known about a 10% rate increase, they might have changed the way they voted. The candidates standing for council were potentially misled about the state of the books. This has been a much harder job that they've come into than what they thought it was going to be. So there's a lot of unanswered questions about this pre-election report. How can such a blowout in OPEX occur? Ships are complex things, as councils are. You need accurate reporting on a monthly basis on OPEX and CAPEX. This blowout should never have occurred. This was the process that used to happen, and you can see here, the annual budget for this particular project was 150,000. The actual spend was 300,000, the variance of 150. You should be tracking that monthly and know, as councillors, you should have access to this information. Clearly it wasn't available. Should be tracked continuously. Budgets can then be cut throughout the year. Previous CEO set up the system, but it was dismantled, was my understanding, by the current CEO in 17-18, and the staff that were doing that business improvement were made redundant. This is what makes it difficult for you as government. You're essentially the board of directors. The mayor is the chair of this board, chief executive is the captain, and he has these KPIs. Maintaining systems of effective planning and accurate reporting of the financial and service performance of local authority. This is in the Local Government Act. Also, facilitating representative elected participation and effective management of the activities of local authority. The other problem is that your mayor has effectively neutered some of the safeguards. Infrastructure Committee no longer meets. Regulatory Committee no longer meets. The Audit Committee, the CEO only attended 4 out of 9 audit committees for that year. So councillors couldn't question the financial matters. This is one of the things that leads to the blowout. So there's the axing of the committees, the axing of the detailed project reporting. The fiscal impact of the OPEX blowout should have been known well before 19th September. What needs to happen? Well, I believe there should be an independent review of what went wrong and how to fix it. Who, if anyone, should be held accountable? There should be a review and expenditure committee set up. The full council is not sufficient to monitor this. You need to be able to give the councillors power back to monitor what's going on and reinstate the detailed project reporting. Conclusion. We're in difficult times. We're not out of the storm yet. COVID is hitting a second wave overseas. New Zealand borders are likely to remain closed to international business for quite some time. Our tourism sector, which contributes $75 million to the economy, is going to be damaged by that, despite what we do for domestic. Many businesses are reliant on discretionary spend. Government wage subsidy are likely to end in September. Some businesses have been kept alive by that. The rates rise is coming at a bad time. We need to get our house in order. Any questions?
Are there any questions of Ben? There being none, thank you. Oh, sorry,
I got one. Ben, do you believe that the current tax on land and fees charging model is sustainable for council?
There's a terrible question that's beyond my...
Well, it's a very relevant question to what you put, so that's why I'm asking the question.
Well,
that's what we're stuck with, so that's why I'm asking the question.
Well, no, my point is that if you have a budget and I'm running my household budget and I'm overspending on groceries, I should know throughout the year. That's my main point.
Yeah. Thank you. Are there any other questions of Ben? There being none, thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
I'll invite Len Salt as the next speaker.
Morena. Your Worship, councillors, staff, thank you for having us. As you will see, there's a group of us come over from Whitianga. For many of the people here, it's the first time they've attended a council meeting. And so this is an opportunity for some of the people here to participate, to see what happens and to get involved in the democratic process. We're here to talk about water, and this is something that is concerning us greatly. 14 years ago, Waikato Regional Council, I'm from Waikato Regional Council issued a resource consent for TCDC to draw water from the Whangaroa River. In those 14 years, Whitianga has changed. It's a different place from what it was. There's been a lot of development, a lot of new housing. It's an area that's growing. It's an area that we love. We feel honoured and privileged to live and work there, but it's very different from what it was. So we have very great concerns about the ability of our current water supply to maintain the levels that we need to supply our town. On or about the 1st of February last year, or this year, sorry, our consent conditions were breached. Now those consent conditions with WRC continued to be breached on an almost daily basis for a matter of months. Now the WRC's position is that they're not impressed. And they're at a point in the conversations that I've had with them that they are starting to get grumpy about the fact that TCDC have had a consent for 14 years and haven't done anything about improving or changing the water supply or putting in place an alternative water supply for the town. Now what that means for TCDC, and I don't have to tell you this, is that TCDC runs the risk of being fined or sanctioned or court action by Waikato Regional Council. Now I'm sure that's not something that this council wants to risk, but it needs to be taken seriously. So the Waikato Regional Council expectation is that after 14 years, something is done. At least there's a plan in place. But the reality is there is nothing in the annual plan. There is nothing in the long-term plan, or there wasn't until our community board and our local councillors put a proposal to this council that we start an investigation. And from our point of view, this is urgent. We came very, very, very close to that water intake being breached during the summer. If we have another summer like we've just had, we're in a very, very dangerous position. If we get an interruption to that water supply, we're in a very dangerous position. Now, you might have heard last night on the news, Auckland's mayor was saying that they're in a drought situation, their water supply is critical, but Auckland has a plan B. They can draw water from the Waikato River. Now, they don't have a consent. They're 106 on the list for the consents, but in an emergency situation, they've got the ability to step in and draw that water. We don't have a plan B. If anything happens to the Whitianga water supply, we're in trouble because there isn't an alternative. So we understand that the council, if you look at the agenda for today, the packet is 200 and something pages. We understand that you have a big job to do. We understand that their budgets are tight, and we lobby hard for those budgets to be brought under control. But this is about priorities. This is about core infrastructure, and this is about the urgency of this situation. So we are asking for this council to reconsider that proposal to do an urgent investigation of the water situation, and whatever proposal, whatever plan has come up with, goes on to the long-term plan. We understand the process. What we can't afford to do is to have that proposal deferred for another 12 months before we even start looking at it. Because I can assure you, and I'll wrap it up now, I can assure you that if we get into an emergency situation next summer and we run out of water, then the people of Whitianga won't be asking me what's going on, they'll be asking you. So I'd ask you to consider that. Thank you very much for your time.
Ian, thanks for the presentation. I've just got a couple of questions. Do you believe that regardless of what the supply situation is, we've got lots of them, we should be conserving water, which is a precious commodity and a finite resource?
I absolutely believe that, and I can assure you throughout the summer period, the people of Whitianga went to extraordinary lengths to conserve water. The problem is, John, that even with the extraordinary lengths that we went to conserve water, we're still very, very close to running out.
Do you think that the average household in Woodend would have any idea of the amount of water they consume at the moment?
Probably not.
Okay, following on from that, water meters, they would quantify the amount of water that each household uses. Do you think this would be a benefit to the Woodend community?
I think water meters are inevitable. The problem that you've got in our area is that so many of the people are absent for most of the year. So if the infrastructure still has to be paid for, whether you're there for 2 weeks of the year or not, then you've got to be very careful about how you structure that. Because if you are there for only 2 weeks and your total water charges are based on your water meter or your water usage, then who's going to pay for the rest of the infrastructure? And that means the burden goes back onto the permanent residents. So I agree, water meters are going to happen, but it's got to be structured properly so that it's not an unfair burden on permanent.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. You got another question?
Okay, look, it's good to hear you think water meters are inevitable, because they are. It's been proven time and time again that they actually serve. They make people aware, they quantify it, they put costs to it, so therefore they are aware of what they use and they do.
And they stop leaks.
Well, they stop leaks, you're aware of leaks, there's a whole lot of stuff. Yes, get leaks in. So, all right, no, I'll leave it at that. That's fine.
Thank you. Terry?
Hey, thank you, Land, me understand your the issues up there is important. If you look at council, we're serving a pretty big debt at the moment, $130 million. The cost of business is going up. Projects come in sometimes over budget. So we're really, at the whole place at the moment. Have you considered going to the regional council who've got $100 million in liquid assets available and starting with them and looking at a targeted rate project?
With respect, Terry, it's not my job. Yeah. Seriously, I've got a job. I work. It's the job of council, and the councillors that are around this table at the last election campaign stood up and said, we will take care of infrastructure. We are the people that can do this. Trust us, we know what we're doing. And so we're now saying to the councillors around this table, absolutely, we trust you. Why isn't it happening? Why isn't there at least something on the plan?
Yes.
We don't know how to deal with our regional council, so.
Are there any further questions? There being none, thank you, Len.
Thank you.
I'll now invite Matthew Cooper, representing Sport Waikato.
Kia ora, ko Matthew Cooper toki ingoa. Bill Cooksley, the Thames-Coromandel District Sports Coordinator.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to Council this morning. These are pretty unprecedented times in sport and recreation at the moment with COVID-19 and repercussions. Active recreation has been a big winner in terms of the opportunities, I think, and also the opportunities to capitalise on the domestic tourism market around cycle trails and also the opportunities through DOC around here. So we believe that's a good opportunity. Just on behalf of Bill, sport's in a reasonably fragile state at the moment across the Waikato region. We believe that COVID-19 pandemic represents a strategic moment in sport and recreation where the crisis has created a real opportunity for organisations, clubs in the Thames-Coromandel and regional organisations in the Thames-Coromandel to really challenge whether they are fit for purpose in the way they operate. We think this is an extremely important time for us and the role that Sport Waikato plays. In terms of rescue and recovery through Sport New Zealand, there has been some rescue funding that has been directed our way to actually facilitate on behalf of Sport New Zealand and the government, and one's called a community resilience package, where we're seeing clubs being supported around fixed costs and also regional organisations to the tune of $37,000 in the Thames-Coromandel District. So that's supporting your clubs and your regional organisations such as Thames Valley Hockey. So there's been some support around that important area around fixed costs, rent, etc., to support those organisations to keep going, to keep ticking over. Recovery mode talks about, there's a lot around rescue, but I think more importantly for Sport Waikato, our focus is on really around different and better, around what can we do with your clubs in the Thames-Coromandel, your sporting clubs, around what is different, what does innovation look like, what does collaboration look like, and also what does strategic thinking and innovation look like, because we have to start thinking better. And so at Sport Waikato, we believe this is a good opportunity. I know that the reason behind the opportunity has been terrible in terms of the pandemic, but we see this as an opportunity to go forward with our clubs in the Thames-Coromandel District in terms of how we operate. Just on that, Sport Waikato's big focus in terms of Thames-Coromandel has been some really good piece of work that Bill's been driving with your team around the Thames-Coromandel District Sport and Active Recreation Plan, which we're seeking adoption later on this morning. We would hope that we would get adoption. I know that Bill's done a good job with all the community boards and presenting to the boards. We see this as a really important guiding document and having a plan. Now, when I talk to funders, and particularly the likes of NZCT out of Wellington, they tell me that, Matthew, we really need to focus. We've got some support for Thames-Coromandel. We need to support them. So having a plan like this, Council, is really important. And so looking forward to coming back later to see if Council considers an adoption of the Thames-Coromandel District Sport and Active Recreation Plan. So thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to you.
Thank you, Matthew. Bill, welcome. Did you want to say a few words at all?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Sandra and councillors for the opportunity. I think the overriding strategy of our Northern Waikato and what Matthew has alluded to really resonates from a local level. We can see that, and I can certainly see that from your local clubs and organisations that are in contact with me, and I act as that direct link between those organisations and our overriding strategy. And I just want to thank the council members and the community board members that have read through the District Sport and Active Recreation Plan, which, as I say, we're seeking adoption later on in this council meeting. So hopefully at that stage, if there's any questions, then fire them through.
Can I just thank you both? I mean, Sport Waikato do an exceptional job and have done so for many years under your leadership, Matthew, which has been extraordinary. And sport and recreation is incredibly important to us. It's one of those key aspects of this district that I think a lot of people in our 70% visitor market, which is domestic, also enjoy. So thank you very much for all your hard work. And I'll just ask Terry a question and then Matthew.
Yeah, I'd just like to say Matthew and Bill, especially Bill, has been really proactive in the area, looking at those clubs and how to keep them kickstart again and look at opportunities to maybe blend together, and also some new opportunities. So Bill, thank you very much, and
thank you,
look forward to working with you.
Yeah, and that's our goal is to make this plan live. That's what we do. So we can always have a lot of plans, Council, but with Bill's really proactive and energetic approach, we believe we can make it happen.
We know you like to do stuff rather than just always think about it, so that's great.
Thank you for the report. I was just wondering what your take is on the reduced amount of funding that sports clubs are currently not receiving because of the grassroots and those.
Yeah, very good point. Big issue in sport, Councillor, is at the high performance end, they are 70% weighted on getting a medal at every 4-year event. This is the high end. Okay. And at grassroots level, 70% is a lot of it's relying on class 4 gaming. And so that's your comment there, I think, saying, well, that's taken a real hit. So we've got a system, in the sport and rec, which is not right. We need to look at how do we talk about collaboration. And this is where I think organisations like us have to have some serious conversations with your regional sports organisations that control the clubs. Do we need so many clubs in terms, I'll use the sport of, say, rugby, for example. Do we need 3 rugby clubs in a town, or do we, can we actually have 1 club? We need to start thinking about, now I've talked about mergers and amalgamations, and that's always quite, usually in the room here, there might be some fierce loyalty towards a person's club. But I think in terms of the year 2020, in terms of sustainability, in terms of collaboration, I think that it's probably better for us to be thinking seriously around that smarter approach. What are the other alternatives? I mean, I think also we've been exposed in sport about reliance so much on gaming as well. So it's a model which doesn't, I believe, doesn't have a sustainable future if you're so reliant on gaming trust money.
If I can just add in there as well, Councillor, is that there's a lot of development work going on in the background with clubs and organisations about alternative funding avenues as well, rather than that reliance on that class 4 gaming. So that's part of our role as well, is to lead and enable those organisations to build up their capability and remain sustainable.
Comment 2 is there's probably now in sport and recreation too many layers. And one thing that COVID represented was actually the opportunity of maybe the volunteer. So the volunteer is more of a, respectfully, more of a senior elderly is where our volunteers are coming from. My age group and probably a demographic younger than me aren't great volunteers. And so I think we've become too reliant on creating a lot of layers in sport, and probably too many. And we're looking at that.
Can I just pick up on the volunteers in sport, and it's just extraordinary amount of people that volunteer and give of their time, and it's the sports awards that clearly illustrate that. So you do a brilliant job, and it really does bring it home when you go to the sports awards and you just see all the participants and the level of contribution. Really outstanding. So thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, Councillor.
Okay, so any more consideration? Right, are we going to items not on the agenda? Do I have a mover and a second for public forum? Robin, seconder? Tony? Oh, sorry. Okay. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Yes, carried, thank you. Items not on the agenda? We have no further items. No further items. Any conflict of interest? There being none, we'll go to the minutes for confirmation. So if we look to page 3, it's the minutes for confirmation. The suggested resolution that we received the minutes of confirmation report dated 5th of June 2020 and approved the suggested resolutions in attachment A. And this is taking it pretty much en masse. So do I have a mover?
I'll move.
Moved Martin, seconded Tony. Any discussion? Gary.
On page 78, I was at that meeting.
Yes, I've been informed. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Tony.
I have spoken with Ariana. I sent my name in from the Audit Committee in terms of trees, what are trees in the river, and spelled out what the issue was. So I haven't got any amendment to the minute in that regard. So I just said recorded it, so it's a more generic issue. It's not part tree in the river. It relates to the whole forestry issue and the amount of trees and rubbish that end up in the waterways and in the estuaries and in the sea and on the beaches. So that is for us to get back to the regional council and say that needs better monitoring, because it's an excellent way to happen. And some people have seen the size of the logs that came down the last event. They weren't twigs.
I appreciate that.
So I'd just like to see the amendment to the minute at some stage, so I know it's recorded.
And the log in particular that you raised, the big carrier log, that just for your information, it's gone to the high school. The high school are working with, I think, council and others on how best to utilise that particular log. It was massive. Oh, Ellen. Helen?
And Marty Hay.
Marty Hay, that's okay. Thank you, appreciate that. Okay, so any others, Robin?
Yes, well, I have something, a question about resolution 2 on page 4, the McGregor Bay wetland. When we were on the bus tour to Coromandel, I was led to believe that was rather a contentious issue with the locals, with one group contesting what council wanted to do, and so we're being asked for this resolution, but I don't know what the background is since we heard about the fact that there was issues with the continuing process, or
it's just approving further investigation and report back.
okay.
So I'm comfortable with that. It's just given more knowledge basically on the situation. You happy with that? John? Okay. Any other matters to be raised? There being none, subject to those two amendments, then I'll put the resolution, all those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We now to 1.6, and so I'll invite Brian Coburn. To speak on behalf of Hesketh, Henry and Richmond Villas. Thank you, Brian. And Tom.
Kia ora. Called Matthew Casey for that. I'm not Brian Coburn today.
No, Mr. McCasey.
Casey, Matthew Casey.
Casey, I'll be you.
I've prepared something in writing to circulate, which I'd like to talk to, if that's in order, Your Worship.
That's fine.
And I've also got a few diagrams.
Yeah.
Can I just, before we start, I'd just like to let everybody know that there will be a fire alarm tested around 10 o'clock. So don't panic, and you can remain seated in the chamber or not. Yeah. Okay, just test so we can all just stay here. So just a little warning you all.
I think we're actually going to leave. I've been through this before, and you won't require them to leave.
So just testing the sound, not our ability to vacate quickly. However you feel the need, Gary. It won't be pleasant.
Thank you, Your Worship, and councillors, for the opportunity. Most of you, I hope, will know Colin Parker. He and his wife own the Richmond Villas retirement village, which in the diagram I've just given you, sorry, I'm a small copy here, is part of it shown in the top left hand there. And we're talking about a block of land, or the few bits of land that are shown just below that, and between the Richmond Villas property and the wharf area. Colin's a major investor in this community and in the district. He tells me that he's just completed a 3-storey apartment block for the village. That's one of 3 that are in plan, and Colin, if I'm right, the overall cost is $30 million that Colin is in the course of investing in this town. He and Richmond, his company, are an adjoining owner. They have a direct interest in this matter, and that is to revoke the reserve status of those 3 pieces of land and to sell that land to a third party. And the understanding is that the sale price is $1. And I refer to that land as reserve land, because currently it's all local purpose reserve. Council should retain ownership of the land and maintain its reserve status. It's needed for protection from inundation and the increasingly severe flooding of the Kaioranga River. The land should not be disposed of. If it is, it should be offered for sale on the open market so that Richmond and others have the opportunity to bid for the land. It's our understanding that the council proposes to sell the land for $1. That's a gross undervalue and fiscally irresponsible. And these matters should not be considered in secret. Both Richmond and the public have a right to know what's going on. Now, I'll give you some background. Some of the members around the table will recall this issue coming up before, but some won't know much about it. I don't want to spend too much time on the background because the real focus is on what should happen from now. But the point I make is that it started in 2016, and ever since then the matter's been dealt with pretty much in secret. There was a report prepared for the council meeting on the 13th of December 2016 and a valuation report referred to valuing the land at $12,500. Ngāti Maru had offered to buy the land for that price, and that included providing a stormwater easement. The report gave no consideration to other opportunities for disposal of the land, and apart from the stormwater issue, it identified the issue of public access to the coastal walkway and Esplanade Reserve, but didn't make any mention of flood risk. The report suggested that despite disposal of the land not being contemplated in Council's long-term plan, it should be sold to Ngāti Maru for $1 in exchange for a commitment to grant a right-of-way easement. And that was to provide access to the Esplanade walkway. It suggested the sale take place once Ngāti Maru became owner of the Kiwi Rail land, and I understand it either is now or has become owner of that land. That was part of a treaty settlement, and that puts Ngāti Maru in a similar situation to Richmond. That is, they both own land adjoining the reserve land. It's Richmond's understanding, and it hasn't been challenged by council, the sale to Ngāti Maru will be for $1 on condition that it grant a stormwater easement, and there's no longer any provision for a right-of-way easement. The land is worth considerably more than even the valuation which we understand was provided by Ngāti Maru of $12,500. Richmond has recently offered $30,000 for the land, and if Richmond gets the land, its intention is to develop it for stormwater protection. As you may or may not be aware, Richmond has already paid for a wall around most of its land and would like to continue that wall around the rest of its land, and this land is suitable. In fact, it's ideal for that purpose. Council did not consider the impact on Richmond of the revocation of the reserve status and of the future development of the land, nor did it consider offering the land for public sale, nor the adjoining owner, that's Richmond, as an obviously interested purchaser. Richmond only discovered the situation from a small notice in the Hauraki Herald in May 2017, which advised of the intention to revoke the reserve status and dispose of the land. There was no indication that a deal had already been made to sell it to Ngāti Maru for $1. It objected to the revocation and made a number of the above points and others in its objection. Council met again in secret to consider the objection, and it resolved at that meeting to direct staff to negotiate further with Richmond and with Ngāti Maru and to report back once a proposal had been agreed. However, there was no engagement with Richmond, there was no negotiation and no proposal, let alone any agreement. Notwithstanding these failures, a report was presented at the council meeting in August 2018. That report was misleading by omission, particularly because it didn't explain all of that and did not present a balanced perspective. Council's resolutions at that meeting were therefore based on incomplete and potentially misleading information. The resolutions were to commence the process to revoke the Reserves Act classification of the land and to enter into some sort of commitment to sell the land to Ngāti Maru, again, evidently for $1. Although its direction had not been complied with, the council went ahead and sought ministerial consent to the reserve status being revoked. The application was also misleading for the reasons I've given above. While it referred to council's intention to sell the land to Ngāti Maru, it gave no details, including the nominal sale price. So in 2019, Richmond made a submission to the Minister, that's the Minister of Conservation, because revocation of the reserve status requires ministerial approval. Richmond advised of its objection and reasons why the land should be retained. And it appears that the Minister has taken on board at least some of Richmond's concerns, especially regarding flood protection that the land should be providing. The Minister, through her delegate, the Department of Conservation, wrote to Council on the 13th of December. Doc's email of that date is not included in your agenda report, so I've attached it as attachment A, and you will see that it specifically states that the Minister must be satisfied that Council has given fair and reasonable consideration to the matters raised by Richmond, and specifically it directs you to consider why the land should be retained for flood control purposes. Now, the Hesketh Henry, Mr Coburn's objection letter is set out in your agenda at pages 100 and 102. For some reason, 101 is something else that's been inserted in between them. And if you refer to that, you'll see the reasons that are given are well explained there. They explain the benefit that the land provides for flood protection works, the need for a stock bank, and goes into it in some detail. Now, I'll invite you to read that. I won't take you through that right now, but that's where it's all laid out. Richmond understands that a report has been prepared by Mr. Muston, who's your property manager. We've been refused a copy of that report, so we don't know what it says. We assume that it's addressing the matters raised in the Minister's or the Department of Conservation letter, but we don't know. Well, sorry, we've been told that it does do that, but we don't know whether it recommends for or against the retention of the reserve status and the retention of the land. We just don't know. So that's why we've been asked to come along here, but we're talking to you with a couple of hands tied up behind our back. So we've got no knowledge of any claimed basis on which the land should not be retained for flood control purposes, and the reasons why it should be have already been set out in that letter from Mr. Henry. If there is any such basis, then before council can give fair and reasonable consideration, Richmond must be adequately informed so that it can respond. Now, Hesketh Henry's letter summarises the flooding problems facing the Thames Township. Councillors should familiarise themselves with the location of the land I've just been talking about and its importance as an additional seawall protection around the Richmond Villas site. And that protection should be extended onto the reserve land. As I mentioned, Richmond recently constructed a 3-storey apartment block adjacent to the reserve land on reclaimed its former landfill land. And council recognised the flood hazard and required Richmond to register a notice on its title stating that the land is considered to be subject to inundation, potential flooding, overland flow, storm surge, tidal effects and ponding. So if you're told something other than that, then the question is why has council required that notice to be put on there, identifying all of those hazards? Richmond's is not the only land at such risk, but even if it was, council has a responsibility to assist in its protection from these hazards. I just want to point out that there are fiscal responsibility obligations on council. Again, we're assuming, because that's not been disputed, that land that's apparently now worth $30,000 is being sold for $1, and that's not prudent financial management. And I just draw their attention to the provisions of the Local Government Act that if council incurs a loss unlawfully, then councillors can be personally liable. I don't use that as a threat, I just draw that to your attention. Now I'm concerned about the secrecy that surrounds all of this. The Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act states that the fundamental principle that information shall be made available unless there's good reason for withholding it. Council's position in this case has been to withhold information so as to avoid scrutiny of its dealings with public land. The reasons given for withholding information and for meeting in secret are not good reasons. They establish a clear pattern of avoiding open scrutiny of council's actions. The particular information which has been withheld includes the valuation report from 2016, the purchase price in the Ngāti Maru agreement, and the report, including an earlier withdrawn report from Mr. Muston, presumably addressing the Minister's 30th December direction. The reasons for withholding the valuation report are given so as not to prejudice the party, presumably Ngāti Maru, who supplied it, or council's commercial interests may be prejudiced, and because negotiations with Ngāti Maru have not yet concluded. In my submission, those reasons are fabricated. We already know what the report valued the land at. The only reason for withholding the valuation is that there's other information that might embarrass the council and be a cause for public concern. If the valuation was provided to the council by Ngāti Maru, as seems to be the case, there is no possibility of its or the council's commercial position or negotiations being compromised by it being made public. The reason for withholding it would seem to be because council can't justify selling for $1 land that was valued in 2016 at $12,500 and now is worth $30,000. The public and others have an interest. Others with an interest have the right to know what's going on. The reasons given for withholding the Muston report are that its disclosure would prejudice the commercial position of the person who supplied it or was the subject of it, or not allow the council without prejudice or disadvantage to carry out negotiations. I say it's bizarre to suggest that Mr. Muston's commercial interest would be prejudiced by his report being made public. It's difficult to understand how council's commercial position can be affected. The report is not about a commercial proposal, it's about whether or not the reserve status should be revoked, and presumably about flood protection for an area of Thames Township. Both of those are very public issues. The terms on which council has said it will sell to Ngāti Maru have apparently already been decided on, but if the reason for withholding the report and considering it in secret is to consider this, it's not a commercial negotiation. Such negotiation would come later. It appears to have been predetermined that the Muston report and council's discussion later in this meeting are to be in secret. That's contrary to the principles of Lagoima and to the Minister's requirement that fair and reasonable consideration is given to Richmond's concerns. It's unfair to Richmond if a decision is made against its interest without knowing on what basis that decision might be made and having a reasonable opportunity to respond. The withholding of the Muston report has denied Richmond that opportunity. The council should decide not to proceed with revoking the reserve status and instead should retain the land for flood control purposes. Any decision otherwise would be unfair to Richmond as well as being unreasonable. Now, if you want to hear from Colin, he's here. I'm conscious of time and I haven't left much time for questions.
And we do have another speaker, so thanks. Colin, did you want to say a few words?
I'd just like to say that I've got met along and a lot of those discussions does concern me because the stock bank, we spent a lot of money when we did all our land, as Bush knows, about a metre higher than Queen Street. We had spent a lot of money on the stock bank in front of Richmond Villas, extremely amount, I don't know how many thousand, before we could even start building, but it's the only stock bank in Thames, right? When you go past Richmond Villas to the wharf, when you had the siege tide, it was running over the wharf down at Queen Street. And my argument is that I had to spend the money to protect my land, and now we've got this land next to me. It was originally part of my land, and it was given for contribution to the council for the previous owner of the land, which is fine. But then the transferring that land back to out of that, when there's a flood risk and everything like that. If the Carong had a hell of a storm and came down there, Queen Street would be that's the most dangerous part, these are river beams. Queen Street would be a river, and no one is, I don't know, you've got people investigating this, but it's just common sense it'll be a river because I've seen it going over the wharf line down Queen Street with no rain in the Carong Valley. It's really serious, this stuff. Now this building I've been spending $30 million on, all I just wanted is protection around it because if flood water get into the underneath of the reclamation, it will cause, it could cause problems with the foundations.
Thank you. Okay, any questions?
Quick question about the difference in valuation between 2016 at 12,000 and your valuation this year at 30,000. Why is it so different?
Well, it was ever put to the market back in 2016.
Right.
And Richard's offered 30,000.
Right. So that's not an official valuation, that's just the people that
Might be worth it.
Right, thank you.
We don't know if we public value might be worth it, but we definitely need that land for protection.
No, just.
Thank you. Thank you both. We now have Paul Majuri. Welcome to the meeting, Paul.
Yes, I'm thanks.
No, queer, Your Worship. Just checking you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, and unfortunately you can see me as well. Hopefully I have got my right inside outside voice. I'm also conscious there's a chair on your left-hand side, so I'm not sure if that's blocking me or the screen shows me.
You're absolutely fine. Okay. You're good to go.
Okay. Well, tēnā tātou, and thank you for the opportunity to present from afar. Unfortunately, Ngāti Maru can't employ QCs, so they've just got me as the booby prize. So I just want to address a few matters on this take. Thames is one of the mana whenua areas of the Ngāti Maru rohe. The establishment of Thames relied on the monarchy of Ngāti Maru. Large parcels of land in Thames were gifted for churches, schools, the hospital, port, police station, and reserves in the early to mid-19th century. And so how did the Council of the day reciprocate the monarchy of Ngāti Maru? One example is the historical Thames-Hikuwai Road. Because of the concerns of our ancestors with the effects of those road on wāhi tapu cultivations and being potentially levied rates, the Ngāti Maru rangatira of the day opposed that road. In 1877, Ngāti Maru and Thames County signed an agreement that Ngāti Maru, and I quote, are not now or at any time in the future to pay rates, unquote. The agreement also provided for the protection of wāhi tapu and cultivations. Clearly, that was a good outcome in its day, except when a few years later, Thames County reneged on the agreement and tried to levy rates against Ngāti Maru. Ngāti Maru opposed the rates demands and the dispute went to the courts. The courts ruled against Ngāti Maru on a legal technicality, and Council has over the last 130 years, both its predecessors and the more recent manifestations of Council, have tried to levy rates against Ngāti Maru for 130 years. However, and in a positive way, in recent years, Council, as some of you or many of you know, have agreed to try and resolve this issue with Ngāti Maru over that historical rates agreement, but that is yet to be concluded and hopefully not too far away. Just as an historical footnote, that agreement allowed Ngāti Maru to block the Thames-Coromandel Road if the agreement was not honoured by Council. And over that long period, Ngāti Maru never tried to enforce that agreement by blocking the road. But how else has Council honoured and reciprocated the manaaki of Ngāti Maru? Well, another example was during the 1920s, the Thames Borough Council heavily borrowed for capital projects. With the onset of the Depression in the 1930s, Thames Borough was on the verge of bankruptcy. And in 1932, a commissioner was appointed to replace Council, and they had the sole power to raise revenue by the enforcement of rates. And you can perhaps guess where this story is going. While Ngāti Maru people faced 16% of the rates imposed, they suffered 75% of the forced land sales. So between 1932 and 1947, the number of sections of Ngāti Maru land in the township fell from 163 to 31. I'll just repeat that. Our ownership went from 163 to 31 properties in Thames Township for rates demands, despite the rates agreement that had been reached in 1877. If we fast forward to recent years, in 2009, Ngāti Maru and the Crown commenced treaty negotiations for the Crown's breaches of the treaty. Part of the redress package that's been agreed between the Crown and Ngāti Maru includes the return of Danby Field, Thames Railway land, and the hardstand area by the wharf, Shortland Wharf. Is the Crown gifting those lands? No, we have to pay for them at market rates, despite those being as the result of Crown treaty breach. Ngāti Maru plans to invest heavily here to activate a mixed-use precinct of food and beverage and housing. That is what led to the proposal to acquire the 3 small properties which Council agreed to do in 2016. In reliance on that Council agreement, Ngāti Maru has invested significant time and money for the planning of this land. That is included in the discussions with Council's lawyers and also its technical folk dealing with the matters of stormwater and water management, and that's why we've agreed and we propose detailed easements to be able to cater for that. So we do not know why in 2020 this matter has even been reconsidered. Ngāti Maru does not renege on our agreements, and we don't expect Council is going to renege on its agreements either. And just some concluding comments in terms of what you've heard. This is not the hearing of the reserve status uplift. That is a matter for the Department of Conservation through its delegates, and that's part of a separate process. Clearly, by its own admission, Richmond Villas is a trade competitor, and they're trying to advocate to you for a trade competition outcome. Richmond Villas, as we've understood it, has threatened to take Council to court. Now you've heard perhaps not threats, but warnings of personal liability on behalf of each of you. And that's an interesting and pretty muscular stance. Thank you. And finally, you've also had a lecture to you about privacy in matters. As Council is well aware, when it comes to commercial negotiations, those are not done in public. And if Richmond Villas has complaints about the employment process, their remedy, of course, is as well known as to go to the Ombudsman. So those are the matters I wanted to raise with you. We expect to proceed in honouring our respective agreement and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Really appreciate that. I'd just like to also acknowledge Wasi Nāmani, Leanne Nāmani and John McIntyre who are here today as well. Paul,
can you hear me?
I can, thank you.
Yeah, Paul, I'm just concerned about the fact that this Richmond Villas has got a very large investment there on a floodplain recycled area that was dumped before that, and want to protect their site. This is a small piece of land. Can you see what they're about trying to protect? I can't understand why you want to object to them trying to protect their property.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the intention here really is from Richmond Villas. What I would say is the matter of water management, including stormwater management, has been addressed by your hydrologists and engineers. It is an existing facility, and the potential capacity in terms of future growth has been assessed. for any development that Ngāti Maru undertakes in terms of investing in this precinct, obviously we have to go through the Local Government Act and Resource Management Act. So all matters that are required by both those pieces of legislation would be addressed and go through council.
Thank you, Paul. Anybody else have any further questions for Paul? There being none, thank you very much, Paul. Really appreciate your presentation.
Good on all. Thank you.
Good luck. Right, okay, so we're now going to item.
Just need to receive those.
So does somebody just want to receive those presentations? John, move John, Laura, seconded Robin. All those in favour, please say aye. Yes, Kerry, thank you. So we now have 1.7, which is the submission of proposals to revoke reserve status and sell land at Tapu. And we have some speakers. Yeah, no. We have John McIntyre and Leanne Marmay. Welcome.
Kia ora, Mayor and councillors. I was just looking behind me, I wasn't sure whether my colleague was looking at my back. And wouldn't have been a good look, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I am.
Oh, well, in that case, I'll just move to the side.
You're right, John.
Look, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this particular issue at Tapu. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the process things, and Leanne will provide some further details of that and the substance of our concerns. I'm in a way a little embarrassed in coming to the council today, because the process of this particular issue has left us sort of bereft of any factual information. In fact, just to give you an illustration, I earlier asked the council members for a copy of the agenda just to actually understand at what point we were on, and we got that agenda there, and I kind of looked over the back of it and noticed on the back page of it there's a report there at page 232, which we haven't seen. So we actually haven't seen any of the council reporting or advice that's to be given on this matter. So in a way, as strange as it might seem, but serendipitous, the previous speakers in regard to Richmond were talking about coming here with their hands tied behind their back. And I feel worse. I come here with actually no information, very little information at all. This started for us when we saw a notice in the Hauraki Herald on the 30th of August in 2019, and it asked for any submissions or public comments to be given by the end of September, just like about a month later. And so we go, look, oh, hang on, what the hell's going on? So we sought some information, and I got a report that it was a technical report that had been written on the historical land access and who owned what, and it's a bit of a dog's breakfast, I've got to say. Along that area, there's all sorts of different series of land ownership. Some of it the council, I think, owns. Most of it I don't think the council does, but you probably know more than me because I haven't seen the reports. So we come here today and we've got no report. We've not had access to that. In fact, last night I was sort of preparing and trying to, get on the web to kind of find out, get the agenda. You're not supposed to have the agenda page. There's nothing. Can't get it. No, not on the web last night. On the to get this report or anything. So I come to you kind of like not even half dressed, in the sense that we don't even know what on earth your advice is. We suspect that because it's a matter which is a reserve, that you are not the final decision makers, that there will be a decision made by other parties. And so if that is the case, then they will be according to the Reserves Act, which some of you probably know, goes into the Minister of Conservation and so on. So, there's Section 4 responsibilities there. The concern for us is that this particular area, the whole of this area, is an area of considerable importance to Ngāti Tamatara. It's been the subject of some particular special provisions in our treaty settlement. And this sort of little strip of reserve is just a little bit of a much wider context. And you heard Mr. Majuri talk about the sort of the wider historical context of things in regard to the piece of land down at Queen Street and the Wharf. We could regale you with a whole heap of stuff as well there, but there's not a lot of point at this point if we don't even know what you're actually proposing to do, other than there's been some cock-up in a person, might be here, I don't know the person, they've built a tram car, they encroached into an area, there's a survey cock-up in a line, and someone had the bright idea of fixing up all of the encroachments all the way down to the Tapu Reserve, which includes land that our tupunas and our people, passed over to the council. We're going to simply say, hey, if you're actually going to take land that's public land and take the reserve status off, you've got responsibilities under the Reserves Act to be considering your treaty partner. We would have thought that it makes good sense to actually be talking to us and offering it to us if it's going to be surplus to yours. Now, you might be going to sell it, you might be going to sell it for $1, you might be going to sell it for $30,000, who knows? I don't, and I'm a bit embarrassed, Chair, to come to you and say that. But I ain't seen the bloody reports to know what it is you're going to do. But hook or by crook, we find out, and as we have to go up to the higher authorities that make these decisions, then we don't want to be in a situation where you've got egg on your face because they haven't followed the correct process, or a process even. And we like to try and work with yourselves. We've appeared in the council before. We're earnestly working to work out and try and have good relations. But hey, you're going to take parts of the land and say it's not going to be the council's, fine, then you offer it back to us. Because that's really important. We've got the code of governance there, what we call Waipatu Kahu, the headland, on the seaward side of the stream there. So, you're messing around in a really important place. That's Ngāti Tamatara's up the Thames coast, and it's not a good way to do it. We need to be working a lot more cooperatively. I'll just leave it at that point, because that's sort of the process. We can go into dates and everything, but I think you get the point of it, eh? Kia ora.
Kia ora, Mayor and everyone. We may be not clear about the process because I don't, along the way we may perhaps not have been given sufficient information. But at the end of the day, we're very clear about the history of Waipatu Kahu and Tapu. Waipatu Kahu and Tapu were originally set aside as a Ngāti Tamatera reserve for residence, cultivations and burial grounds. That was where Ngāti Tamatera hapu lived, breathed, died, ate, lived. That was the settlement. These 5 small parcels of what I understand are Crown land, not council land, are part and parcel of that reserve. That reserve was to be made inalienable when they alienated the broader Waikawa purchase. So the Waikawa lands extend from Te Puru to Kirata in the north. They essentially take up, it's essentially the western range between that area and going down. That's the Waikowai block. That Waikowai block alongside of Moihai, the large area up there, and also the opening up of a Hinimiri to gold mining were all connected. We're all connected. The alienation of Waikowai is a good example of the Crown breaching the treaty. It's sitting in our treaty claims, it's sitting in our Waitangi Tribunal reports. We've negotiated it for coming on 10 years now, and we're on the cusp of settlement. And in 2020 and 2019, revocation of some of these places that are connected to our history is unacceptable, and it's additionally unacceptable when we're not actually engaged in a process as the original owners of that land. So there are some components within those 5 parcels, some which I understand were taken for the Road Public Works Act. Well, they should be, if council no longer require that as a reserve, should be given to the original owners from which that land was taken. It's simple as that. And same in relation to the Crown land. It's not council's to alienate. And we will just reaffirm that, answer any questions you have. But that's really our view. And, you know, one of the other things is we do feel, I don't know whether it's an inequity or something of that nature, but for quite a while we've been highlighting to council our desire to redress Waipatu Kapi Tapu. Now that's a part and parcel of all of this body of land. So that's great. You've got 5 small parcels over here and a pathway that you think it ought to go, we're proposing it going, and that's to third parties who have encroached on that land. You can do that, or you can acknowledge that Ngāti Tamatera oppose the proposal to do that, and perhaps with the same focus of moving through a process for those 5 parcels, you will open the door to have an actual conversation about Waipatu Kapi Tapu, and at the very least bringing that back under the co-governance as part and parcel of our Ngāti Tamatera deed of settlement that was originally agreed to by us in good faith with your managers at the time, that this council subsequently reneged on. So we want to have a talk about that too, because there's actually an opportunity to tip that back into our settlement were you to change your mind around that. And so the two are connected, because we're talking about the same body of land, the same reserve that was set aside for Ngāti Tamatera. So, kia ora.
Are there any questions at the end? Or John? There being none, thank you very much both for taking the time to present, and my apologies for not the information not being available to you, but that's a public exclusion against the reason.
Thank you very much, and I didn't look at that little bit close enough, that public excluded highlight there. But all I'd say is I just ask you a question since you've got none for us.
Okay.
And we're still within our minutes. And we're still within our minutes. We've been counting how many minutes you gave everyone else.
Okay. And your question?
And there was 10 minutes more on one of your first speakers.
Oh, I don't mind it. You can speak for longer.
I know. No, I don't want to take over time, because look, I just simply say this. Whatever your proposal is in the public excluded section, which we don't know about.
Yes.
If it's to alienate the land, then we have not been presented with adequate information.
Yes.
Do you think that is fair and reasonable? Because if you come to the conclusion that it is, proceed on the track, and we'll deal with it in another forum. If you've come to the conclusion that it's not fair and reasonable, then maybe we need to open up some dialogue, defer your decision, and we'll have a chat about it later.
My understanding, and answer to your question, my understanding that due process has been followed. However, there will be further discussions around that in public excluded.
Just leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Awesome, thank you. I don't appreciate it. Right, okay, so do we remove that part?
We've still got Graham and Jenny.
Oh, big pardon. Graham Embry and Jenny Russick for the adjoining landowners.
Morning.
Welcome.
Thank you, councillors.
Good morning, councillors.
My name is Jenny Russick and I'm here on behalf of my parents, Colin and Margaret Russick, the owners of 701 and 703 Thames Coast Road. Graham Embry accompanies me on behalf of 705 property and for First Cabins. I'll give a brief history from my family's perspective. The 701 and 703 properties have been in my family's ownership for over 70 years. My father lived there since he was a young boy. The 701 home was my childhood home and my grandfather living at 703. There was always a huge billowing boxthorn hedge between our home and the beachfront. This was the only separation between that and public access. It went along in front of 701, 703, and then sporadically in front of 705 and 709 to the old toilets where there was a huge clump of boxthorn there. If anyone knows boxthorn, it's horrible, it's worse than bugs.
Oh, it's great protection. Sorry.
My grandfather kept it trimmed on the inside, and my grandfather had a house cow and milked cow in an old shed that was there right beside the boxthorn. The outside billowed along the seafront, and there was not much room between the boxthorn and the sea. And over the years, it's got gradually more and more reclaimed until we've got that nice area in front now. There was a through access road from Wharf Road along the front by the toilets, along the beachfront, all the way to the boat ramp at the south. And in the latter years, it was stopped and blocked off by the council, and there was quite a sort of nice native area planted and strainers put in to allow the public to walk through or push bikes, but not vehicles. And every so often when there were storms and that, my dad would drag logs back up and help reinstate that to preserve no access going through. There was and always had been a fence as far as he can remember, probably going back over 70 years on the southern boundary. That's not a boxthorn hedge but a fence, and part of the original strainer is in the old market carpentry, which is no longer there on the road frontage, and the other is by the drain on the southern side. The southern corner post is still there. Around 55 years ago, a mini tornado picked up the hedge and threw the whole thing in a bundle closer to the home. My parents and grandfather, and the help of friends, undertook the task of clearing the hedge and burning it. No one went close to the hedge from the seaside, and we were always careful as children not to go near our side of the fence to get nasty boxthorns in our feet. There was no assistance of the council because back then everyone rallied together and just did it, you know. Everyone just got the damaged head cleared, and they never thought twice about checking with the council about getting help, getting it burnt. That's what they just did back 55 years ago. So they put a fence up, generally in the vicinity of where the billowing hedge would have been. Cleared and raked all the boxthorn up, and for 55 years or more, my parents mowed and maintained the frontage, 701, 703, and the neighbours, which were Nicholson's at the time before you, Graham, and Firth Cabins, which was my dad's uncle's Teddy Russick's, and he bought the trams and put them on there. So basically that frontage, but my father maintained his area for probably 55 years until council took over, because he's 84 now and he still lives there, and so does my mum. So the fence was put up generally where the boxthorn hedge had been. So no intention of encroachment, but that's where it always was assumed as being. And over time, with the maintenance, with the stocked road, it became an area that the public could enjoy. It didn't detract from it, it actually added to it. There was no longer any box-on hedge, it was a nice area of native planting. There was no through road that meant that cars would go backwards and forwards. People came and picnicked, they played cricket. We share our Christmases over the fence with people picnicking and enjoying the beachside. So if anything, it's enhanced what's been there and not detracted from it without any challenge from anyone at any stage. So I don't think it's creating a precedent. I don't think in the wider context it's creating a precedent, but I think because of the anomalies with the boundaries, it's able to correct, what council's proposing to do now is able to correct anomalies in the boundaries that have been historic, but it's not detracting from any amenity that the public has used previously, because no one has ever used that area because it's been fenced, either with a box-on hedge and then in later times with the boundary fences. My dad maintained the beachfront, as I said, for over 50 years. He's cleaned debris when there's been storms, used his tractor at times to pull logs back up and rake seaweed, and generally to make the area enjoyable for people that use it, and everybody uses it. When council blocked off the access road, it was a lot safer and a lot better for all of the public to use. So the areas in question were never intentionally encroached, but they're there, they're historic. There's buildings such as the old garage, which is 60 in 2 months' time, has been there for my entire life. I remember my grandfather's house. I lived in the 701. So the areas, it's not actually encroaching and taking something away from someone. For the last half a century, it's been there. So in summary, the transfers of the relatively small areas will not create a precedent in the wider context. At council's recommendation, all the frontage areas should be addressed at the same time to create the anomalies in the boundaries, and that seems logical. It won't deprive the public of an amenity area because historically those areas have been used by part of each of the property. The use was not an intentional encroachment, it was historic. Allowing the transfers to proceed will correct this historic anomaly with boundaries in the most expedient way and resolve the building consent difficulties which were occasioned by the 709 tram rebuild, again unintentionally by the owner. It will not alter or detract from what the public have enjoyed for the last half a century or more. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
I was appointed by Fairview Cabins because I was the neighbour, and I met Mr. Paul Clark, which was a member of your council at some stage, and we had a good meeting the day that he was there, and at the conclusion we came to the most effective way was to leave the boundary where it is, because we believed that shifting the boundary in, there will be a lot of repercussions on how close you come to some of the buildings. Do they meet regulations, whatever? So it goes from one problem to another problem, snowballs, because the boundaries get too close to the front and it becomes another regulation. And because I haven't been there many years, I was only there 10, didn't know anything about it in principle, but I agree. The wisest thing I could think is the boundaries be relocated where the fences are, but you people have all the technology. So it all stemmed from that one new building, and otherwise we wouldn't be sitting here talking about it. That's
It's very difficult, and no, there isn't a precedent. I'm sure there'll be many of these sorts of little things happening.
Yeah, that's my concern, is if it moves back, what other problems have we created?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Anybody have any questions for either Jenny or Ryan? There being none, thank you very much for taking the time. Appreciate it. Right, so we now move to item 2.1.
To receive.
Move for a second to receive presentation. Move Martin, seconded Terry. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
It's carried. Welcome, Stephen. Reconfirmation of the appointment of electoral officer, page 105, and then I think we'll break for morning tea.
Second.
Moved by Senator Tony. Any discussion?
Thanks, David.
There being none, all those in favour. Thank you. We now break for morning.
You need a mover and seconder.
No, we just had it. Tony and Murray was so quick.
No, I couldn't even hear.
Took everybody by surprise. So thank you so much, everyone. We'll break for morning tea. Back at 10:30.